Before opening the meeting, please, anyone with an electronic device, mute it to avoid feedback or switch it off, really. Remote participants, so we've got some. I can't see who it is. All right. Hi, Martin. Keep your microphone off unless you wish to speak, and I'll let you. Please note the meeting is being recorded and that staff may use body-worn cameras within the premises. Data captured during these recordings will be processed and retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy, and the meeting recording may be published on the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their SBC or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as being in attendance. So, welcome everyone to the Housing, Health and Communities meeting, including visiting members remotely and members of the public. Can't see any. The following staff are in attendance: Head of Housing and Communities, Charlotte Hudson; Leisure and Technical Services Manager, Jay Jenkins; Community and Regulatory Services Manager, SJ, Sarah Jane Radley, Sarah Jane, yes. Housing Policy and Performance Officer, Zoe Callaway. Welcome, Zoe. Tenor. Democratic Services, Tim Neal, and Martin Castell, God, brain's gone, is online. Service Manager. Right. If you wish to speak, Martin, just put that yellow hand up and somebody will tell me it's up there. So, emergency procedure. We are not expecting a drill or anything. So if the fire alarm goes off, please vacate the premises. I'm looking around. Nobody needs help. Oh, Karen, yes. Karen will need help. Make sure she's out. Just follow me. I should be first. So, item 2, apologies for absence. Are there any? There must be.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me for a moment. My paper has disappeared. So this evening we have apologies from Councillors Perkin, Eyre, Pollard and Neal. And Councillor Neal is being substituted this evening by Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Tim. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on 13th of May. Can I sign these as a correct record? Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Any? No, good. Item 5, matters arising. Update from the Chair on any matters arising from the previous meeting or upcoming agenda items relating to this committee. I don't think there were any. No. Item 6, I have got Councillor Perkin very kindly sent me her chair's update, so I'll just whiz through it. If there's anything that jumps out at you, stick your hand up if you want a question. So, since the last committee meeting, there's been a large focus on the place partnership work. Hannah attended the first meeting of the board and 2 full days of training at Island Works in Sheerness alongside the leader and lead officers. Police and crime panel was held on 23rd of April, and she sent all the members the answer to the question that she raised on behalf of the committee. The next panel is next week, and the question from the CSP, Community Safety Partnership, has been accepted. There's been some negotiations with Swallows about the gym club increasing their higher footprint. Members have been notified about that. Last week saw the beginning of a series of online Kent Marmot workshops that are discussing the Marmot project across the county and collecting information from various partners and stakeholders. She attended a training session on clean air and how to introduce local clean air campaigns, which probably straddles both environment and HHC. But that would be an additional project. Let's mark that up there. She wrote a letter alongside other group leaders to ask for more information on the proposed closure of reserve firefighter services from Faversham. She's waiting a response from the Kent Fire Authority. She also attended LGA conference and sessions on supporting care leavers, tackling homelessness, creating healthy local communities, and the NHS community health model. She's been very busy. And she's busy tonight, otherwise she'd be here. Okay then, members. A forward decision plan. You've got that on the agenda. I did raise at the briefing that we've just had on the budget, if we could invite the NHS estates people to our next meeting, which would be about October, to talk to us about the 106 contributions that planning agree for NHS facilities within vicinity of any development, because I think it's important that all members are aware of how it all works and how much money is sitting there waiting to be spent by the various surgeries practices. So do you all agree? And most of you were in the briefing, but for anybody else, if you've got an objection, please say. No? Great, so we'll have that on. Okay, thank you, members. Now we get to Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you. Just a comment on that. Hannah said about the LGA conference last week. I was also there. And we both attended one session. It was a conference plenary by the independent group. And they had a speaker, Luke Rogers, from the care leaders. And I was sitting there listening, and basically he was telling his story, how he went through from being fostered, I think he said 13 times in different houses. And eventually when he got to, and how the system, when he turned 18, basically drops you like a stone, end up living in a caravan. And he was asked to just tell his story. And it was massively powerful. And I sat there, and Hannah would back this up if she were here. But it did make me think that actually he would be a really good person to come and talk to us about his experience and what we might be able to potentially do with him, with his organisation, and or what he might be able to do, more importantly, for us. But he was an absolute outstanding speaker. I mean, one of the things he made a point of was saying he was invited to go to, I think he said Serbia. Don't quote me on that. To tell his story. He said, off he went, and he told his story, and he said, I did this, I was living in a caravan, I had a broken window, it was cold, etc. And he said it was got quite powerful, because they turned and said, actually, there are people who would love to be into that caravan compared to what they're in Serbia. And it just really hit home. So if there's, say, I've got his details, and he's he's the chief exec of the care leaders. It might be worth having a conversation with Hannah, but he was really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. I've got some things in mind for the following year. So people are briefed, people who are going to be carrying on briefed. So you're happy with the forward decisions plan then? Great, that's agreed with that addition. Now the next one, apologies to the crew who've got an agenda. We've got a late item that was in so early, it got left. That teacher, Jay, wasn't it? Yes, Jay put in his report very early. The leisure contract conditions survey update and approval. Now, apart from we've got one sub here, and give my best to Peter, because he's a regular attender. Peter Marchington. He's not here. Yeah. So yeah, most of this report we have had at working groups, committees and committees and committees and committees. The only new bit of information is how the 2 mil that we have already agreed will be broken down and allocated. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to look at this, to read this, and then Jay will give a very brief introduction. I'm just looking at the page because I did read it somewhere. Well, 2.16, and I think there was an appendix. 2.16 and appendix 1 are the key bits. So if we say 5 minutes, because say apart from Leanne, who picks things up extremely quickly, the rest of you know all about this. So we'll say 5 minutes from now. That's 25. Okay, members, that's 5 minutes. Have you all got through at least the 2.16 and the appendix? That was the important bits. Good, thank you. Okay, so over to Jay Jenkins to give a brief overview.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. On the 10th of September last year, the Policy and Resources Committee resolved that the £2 million be allocated to the capital budget, that the delegated authority be given to the Director of Resources to look at an appropriate source of capital of said funding, and that officers be given the delegated authority to work up a condition survey plan that would predominantly address the areas within the facilities identified, but also to look at reducing running costs and to keep carbon reduction at the forefront. The existing leisure contract expires on the 31st of March, and on the 10th of February last year, Faversham Pools board unanimously voted to come into the contract, which was then approved by the community committee, as it was at the time, on the 5th of March. So that's why all 3 facilities are covered within the report. We are currently evaluating best and final offers for the new contract, which commences on April next year, and we will be bringing a contract awards report to this committee on October. The report explains why Swallows requires a higher percentage of spend, and unfortunately the recent failures and the resultant closures at Swallows are all things that were highlighted within the report, but unfortunately have failed prior to us being able to bring this report and address those issues. Annual usage at Swallows is the highest across all 3 facilities, with just over 51%. Therefore, any loss of income from plant failure is likely to have a greater financial impact to the council. There are 2 recommendations this evening. The first is that the committee approves the condition survey capital allocation for all 3 facilities as per 2.16 and Appendix 1, and agrees that officers begin to procure the work. And the second recommendation is the committee delegates any changes to works or funding splits as per paragraph 216 to the head of environmental leisure and in consultation with the head of finance. Pause there and take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Members, I should have said when I introduced it earlier that it's based on, the allocation is based on need as opposed to want, because I'm sure we could split it on not party lines, but SIP, SHEP, FAV. Whoever's got the most people here, could be Sheppy. But it is based on need, and I think that's the fairest way to go forward. My only question would be is you've put down the figures, and I know we're pretty cute here, and Jay is even more cuter when it comes to contracts. But there are places where it's yeah, members, it was 50,000, but it's, you know, it's now 150,000. But just sign it off. Well, know that we're not into that game. So I suppose my question would be how firm are these costings that you have put in the paper? Because we want the best bang for our bucks, and we're not lining anybody's pockets. Just if they want to keep up in it and dragging it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Understandable. We are fully aware that there is a £2 million budget allocation for these works. The report also refers to some additional funding schemes which we've benefited from, which have enhanced that. But the works themselves, the costings were based on a number of factors, working with existing contractors and the existing incumbents facility management company to secure costings based on current market rates. So the estimated costings that are within the paper are the current price we've been provided with from contractors for those works.
Okay, thanks, Jay. I've got Lloyd and then Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Those who were honoured to be at P&R committee last night, I don't want to rehash some of this stuff which went there in terms of member oversight, etc., because it got rather late. However, and it's picking up your point, what you just said, Chair, slightly, I'm this is for me is a great example where most of this is over my head because in terms of the actual items that need to be done, it's professional, it's health and safety, it's way beyond my scope of knowledge. And I'm content with that. I'd be no good saying, that's good value for money. I ain't got a clue whether a pump is good value for money or not. So I'm quite happy to leave that side of things. But, and it comes back to that point that was made last night about also member oversight on this. And I am wondering whether it's worth actually having a slight tweak and adding a third recommendation of any. So happy with so number 2, recommendation 2. The committee delegates any changes to the workforce funding splits as per Bearcraft 2.16 to the up to the value of, and I'm going to put one out there of say £50,000. Any changes over £50,000 comes back here. Because I think that is a lot of money not to have some sort of member oversight on it. But anything up to that, because they should be relatively small in the technical stuff, go for your life. That's fine with me. But I think when we're starting to talk potential, and hopefully it won't happen, but if we get into that realms where we're talking big changes of big money, then I think it needs to come back here. So if people are happy with that, I'll hold point because in terms of actually making that as a recommendation so we can have a further discussion and then we'll come back to it if we want, if people think that's a reasonable idea later on, rather than get bogged down in having 2 different debates. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, before I take Anne, Jay, can you give us a bit more of an explanation of what you mean by, not what you mean, but give us an example of changes to the works or funding splits that might crop up that, because I do get Lloyd's point.
In relation to the recommendation was in case this evening there was an agreement around reallocation. So it was within the 2 million, but there was a reallocation. In relation to the 2 points made, if I may, I understand the process. I think the members' working group are going to be involved in this process as it unfolds going forward. So that's a cross-party member working group. The other item I'd like to raise is that a number of these items are well over £50,000 as a standalone item. So the boilers at Swallows, as an example, are going to be in the region of 250 to 300 as a standalone item. If we were to have to come back to the cycle of committees, then the economy of scale of getting all the works done in one go is significant compared to doing them as piecemeal along the way. So I would have reservations about coming back on particularly on an over 50 item, because ideally a lot of this we're aiming to get a lot of this work done before the contract starts next April. That's one of the commitments we've made to the new interested parties. So if Swallows at the moment has had 2 closures, one through air handling on poolside, one through the boilers, one through teaching pool filtration, all are big ticket items and are the main pieces of plant in that facility. So if any of those go down, the facility is closed, and then that has a considerable impact on the loss of income. So I understand the concern about having oversight and so on, but I think I'm pretty confident the member working group have regular meetings scheduled through the next 2 or 3 months to look at this work in some detail.
Thanks, Jay. Martin's got his hand up, and I think he might put it in the words of one syllable that I understand, because if we're agreeing the split, and I know a few members got their hand up to question, but if we're going to split are based on need, it's basically, is there suddenly going to be a change in need that means you would need to do what you're saying in para 2? That's what I was trying to get at. What sort of thing, you can't just say, oh, we don't need to put that new boiler in at Swallows now, we need to put it in at Faversham, which would be quite a hefty one. But I'm not seeing that. So, Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies I can't be there tonight. Trains were delayed on the way back from London. I was going to say something similar to Jay. So what we're looking for the committee is really the allocations, as you say, based on need. All of those numbers are based upon estimates as opposed to fully tendered works. So what we were saying is we didn't want to get caught up in the minutiae of we've said it's 50,000 and it's 54,000, etc., etc. So to set a limit on if something deviates from an estimate, I think would be quite problematic. What we're saying is, let's say we tender the works and an item in one centre is far more than we expected, which absolutely could be the case when we do the more detailed, sort of behind the scenes checks. We wanted the ability to go, well, actually, that is still a higher priority than something else on the list. So we wanted that ability to move, but we're talking about flexing on prices. If there was a fundamental change, that something happened at Faversham that meant that we should spend £1.5 million at Faversham instead, clearly that would be something that we would come back to the committee on. And I think on your point on member oversight, or Jay's point on member oversight, absolutely. If things start to deviate, then clearly we can, it would be better for us to be able to go to the member working group. To wait for October or to convene an emergency meeting could potentially cause us an issue with longer closures at a centre if something happens. So there's two things. Number one, they are estimates. So what we don't want to do is be held to such and such cost £20,000 and not be able to award it if it costs £28,000. The second thing is, you're absolutely right. In the time that it takes us to commission the works, something might go wrong at another centre, and therefore that becomes a higher priority than the priority rating that we've set in front of you tonight. The recent events at Swallows should absolutely highlight that, as much as they were all things that were on this condition survey, but we have absolutely no idea when they're going to go more wrong or less wrong. So there needs to be that flex in the programme. But what we're saying is, if there was major flex, a big shift to spend in one direction and not at Swallows, then clearly that would be something that we would bring back to committee.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. And I've absolutely, I don't want it to come across, I don't have any faith in the officers. I absolutely do. I think we've got the best officers on this. And unusual, I'm going to come back to another councillor saying last night. End of the day, we as members are the custodians of the public purse. And if we as the council are looking to fund this, we should have some form of oversight. The amount of money, whether it's £10, £50,000, £100,000, that argument potentially could be used on any amount of money. And I do understand that what happens if it's 50,000 and £1. But that's why you have the markers in there. That's why you have the budget authorities. When it gets to a certain point, it goes to someone else, or someone else, or someone else. I am uneasy of something of a £2 million project. That something of potentially £50,000 could, and I'm not saying it'll be a bad decision, but the decisions are this council, and we as members have to face the public on that, and it'll be, why did you allow that? If it were to go pear-shaped. I'm not saying it will go pear-shaped at all, but I am uneasy without that member oversight. And in terms, and I do get the point about the member working group, but again, I said this last time, it's a working group. They are not decision-making. This is the decision-making body. So I think it needs to be here. And we can arrange urgent extraordinary meetings if absolutely necessary. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. Now, whether it's 50,000, whether that's an appropriate amount or whether it could be more, that I'm happy to have that discussion, but unusually still doesn't sit well with me.
Okay, I can understand that. Before I bring Martin back in, Martin, I'm going to take some views for the other people who've got their hands up. And I've got Anne, Alistair, Tom, Hayden, Kieran, Anne.
Thank you. First, in reference to what Lloyd was saying, I think as members, we're pretty good at coming to extraordinary meetings if we need to. Secondly, 30 years, those boilers had been there. You know, maybe we should have replaced them I think they did really, really well. My last point, the beginning of July, there was a problem at Central House. Rumour had it was a broken sewer. Was that a one-off, or will that have to be factored in for the improvements as well? Because it shut the whole centre for practically a week. Thank you.
Yes, it was an isolated incident. It's not on the survey. It wasn't identified at all. It was actually a break outside of the facility, which unfortunately, because of the nature of the work and the location to the proximity to the plant room air grills, there was an issue with contamination inside, and therefore the facility needed to close initially. There was then a specialist contractor required because there was a high voltage power cable running very close to the sewer, so they couldn't just, excuse my simplicity, dig a hole. They had to use a specialist piece of equipment to extract around, and then they then replaced a section of that sewer. So they closed on the Monday and then reopened on the Friday, with the exception of the pool, because the pool was closed for a slightly different issue. But yeah, that isn't part of these works, and it was an unforeseen event.
Thank you. I mean, my reaction to Lloyd's suggestion is that actually 50,000, as Jay and Martin said, seems a very small amount for the type of things, and things do happen in a hurry. And I think we also need to factor in the opportunity cost. If it does close, you know, every day it's closed, that's money lost. And as Lloyd said, at the end of the day, we're not going to argue on technical grounds. So I think more of a reporting function rather than necessarily a scrutiny function for something like this would be appropriate. But I think giving the delegation to enable quick action so that the facility is up and running as soon as possible, I think is an appropriate approach to this type of scenario.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with what Lloyd said. I think this requires absolute scrutiny from members. It requires absolute oversight from members. I mean, you know, paragraph 2.10, Swallows works required, as detailed in the condition survey, have an estimated cost of circa £3 million. How has it reached the point that one of our most valuable assets for the entire borough requires £3 million worth of improvements? And then the budget allocation that we get is only 2 million. Now, you know, I appreciate the split has been done based on need, but you know, 85% of it at the moment is going to Sittingbourne. How much extra, because so much has been given to Sheppey, Pool on Sheppey, and so much of it has been given to the pool in Faversham, but how much extra work would they require to actually bring them up to speed, like in terms of the small works? Because I understand, like, you know, the budget allocation for Swallows, the extra bit, making it up to 3 million is small stuff that can probably wait and be dealt with at a later stage. But how much extra does Sheerness need? How much extra does Faversham need? And yeah, £50,000, it is a small amount of money, but I'm not here for a laugh. I'm here to serve the people that I was elected to represent. I'm here to serve Swale in some respects as a wider thing. This is a massive income generator, the leisure centres. But we really need to be on the ball with it. And it's bad that it's reached the point that it has, but we need to make sure that absolutely doesn't happen in the future. So I would absolutely second the proposal made by Councillor Bowen around recommendation 3.1 and 3.2. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now talking to an amendment. I'm going to continue with my list because I still think we need a few more views before I call you in, Martin. I've got Hayden and Kieran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got to disagree with Councillor Bowen here. I would be far more comfortable on a scrutiny perspective to have a mandatory report to that working group that regardless of if there's any changes or not, they have to send a report to that working group and it's discussed there. I think that is adequate scrutiny. And then if the working group choose, they can decide that actually this is something that the committee needs to discuss, and then they can refer it to us via an extraordinary meeting. So I wouldn't vote for the tabled amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Although I understand where Councillor Bowen is coming from, personally, I can't agree and I wouldn't support this particular amendment. To read the actual report, especially regarding swallows, the equipment is probably at a risk of failing tomorrow. And echoing what Councillor Gould said, the loss of income couldn't be sustained. And the plant is at its end of life. And it's a needs must. So I think setting any limits that would have to come back to a committee would incur delays. And I don't think that would be very practical. And I would put trust in what Jay and Martin have already said. Martin's already referred to the members' working group and that he would bring back if something was going to be an excessive amount of money. So, yeah, that's my view on the subject. Thank you.
And finally, Leanne and then Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I think we do need a limit, whether it be increased a little bit, as the items are likely to be a lot more. But I think, and as people like, it's fine referring it back to the working group, but the working group isn't a decision-making committee, so you can't make any decisions, and it'd be then an even bigger delay referring it to the working group and then referring it back to, because you can't make a decision full committee. So I think whether we need an adjustment and maybe a bit of advice from Martin or Jay on what rough sort of costings, like the upper sort of limit, but I do think as members we need to have full oversight on what we are spending the money on.
Martin.
Thanks, Chair, and please don't feel, committee, that we're saying we just want carte blanche to be able to do it. You know, clearly there is a clear programme of work set out in front of you, and our aim is to be able to do everything that is on that list. But as I say, there may well be deviations when you tender. I would just draw committee members' attention to the fact that constitutionally, anything under £100,000 in terms of decision that's within the budget framework doesn't need to come to committee. So if it's a contract and it's within the budget and it's under £100,000, it doesn't need to come to committee anyway. So if you were to set a limit, I would urge you to go upwards to that on that basis. But if I could just clarify, are you talking about if it changes, if the allocation between the three centres changes by more than 50 or 100,000, or whether each individual item is flexed? So let's say the boilers at Swallows cost £20,000 more, but something, the air handling costs £30,000 less or £50,000 less. You know, are we talking it's the movement on the allocations to each centre, or are you talking it's on each item? I think that's probably all I need to say, Chair.
Thanks, Martin. Right, we need to nail this down, Lloyd, because what we've got is a list of things which the officers are recommending we spend the 2 mil on. They are rough costings because they're estimates, they are not tender prices. You ain't getting in more than 2 mil, so if there's something you can't do because some of the prices were over, I would expect you to notify members. Or alternatively, if once you get back under the hood, you find something even worse, then that is a change of whatever that said. Change in the, what's my page? Change to the works or funding splits. But the limit is 2 mil, so I think we need, I've got you, Peter, thanks. Can you be clear what it is your amendment is?
Okay, I'm called Councillor Worcester as well. I'm happy.
Been asked to speak.
Yeah. I'm happy with what Martin's just said. So I think it's prudent if we want to put it forward to amend recommendation 2 to the committee delegates any changes to the works of funding split or funding splits as per paragraph 2.16 to the head of environment and leisure in consultation with the head of finance up to £100,000. Recommendation 3. Any change to the works or funding splits as per paragraph 2.16 over £100,000 to be referred back to the Housing and Health Committee. I don't think with respect to the working group, as I say, it comes back, they're not decision makers. And we can be as quick setting up one of these meetings as we are setting up a working group meeting, I think, if necessary. So that would be my what was the phrase we had the other day? Yeah, it's an amended amendment. There was a phrase for it.
So one final one, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was thinking it'd be better, rather than going from 50,000 to 100, it's better to do it as a percentage, quite frankly. Rather than, a huge jump, because that's 100% more than the 50,000. So I think it's far better to refer it back if it's over a certain percentage. Thank you.
I think the point, Peter, is that officers already have delegation up to 100. Oh, right. Which Lloyd missed that bit in the book. Spending too much time on that box, aren't you? So it's already 100. So a percentage wouldn't really work. Okay, then I'm going to take a vote on this. You've all heard what?
So it technically hasn't been seconded yet.
No, it was. Tom seconded.
I'll second the amendment to the amendment, or whatever amendment to the power of whatever it is.
The amended. Okay. Do you know what that is? Good. All those in favour of Lloyd's amended amendment. I'll make that 4. All those against? I make that 7, so that's lost. Now, does anyone want to make any other amendments, or shall we look at the 2 recommendations on the sheet, which I'm happy to propose? And as an aside, if there are any major changes as we go forward on the tender process, I would hope that officers would notify members of the committee as well as the working group. I know some of you sitting here are on that working group, but not all of you are. So, Tom.
Not an amendment, just a question. I did ask it earlier. So the report says that Swallows needs £3 million of work, and it's getting 1.7 million. The report says that Sheppey's getting £302,000. How much does the pool at Sheerness actually need. Because you're happy for a written response. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a question. How does the remaining balance for Swallows affect the new contract tender? Because has all the work's got to be completed before?
Yeah, we have made a commitment to the new operator or the interested parties at this stage that we will do our utmost to conclude as much of that list of works as we can prior to April, with a caveat that there could be overspill for delays, supplies, materials, contractors' availability, and so on. Once the new contractor is awarded the contract in October, then there will be ongoing dialogue with said contractor from sort of November onwards, of which the condition works are a key part of those discussions. It's fair to say all interested parties are very keen, for obvious reasons, that the majority of the condition survey works are completed prior to their arrival, because they would obviously like to come into a fully functioning facility. But there could well be some issues that we will need to discuss with them once they've been appointed.
Thank you. So ideally then we need to find some more funding to cover the rest of the amount for Swallows and say CNS as well prior to the new contract taking place.
Potentially, yes. I recall from the previous discussions, there was discussions around a 2 million provision or a 3 million provision, and members chose a 2 million at the time. There will always be new items that come to light, and unfortunately that will add to the concern. But fundamentally, it's about getting as much of the key priority work, the category 1 works done as we can at each of the facilities for that allocation of funding.
Thank you.
I know. Dolly, you've got your hand up, but you didn't ask if you could speak on this item.
No, and I wanted to apologise, Chair, for that, because I didn't realise I'd be able to make it to the meeting, which is why I've not. So I'm perfectly happy to accept I cannot speak, but if you'd allow me to speak, I would be very grateful.
Briefly, and then Martin.
Yep, lovely. I just wanted to ask us, the leisure centres, obviously one's in our ward, that all of the decisions that are being made are being looked at through the climate crisis lens. I'm not saying that would have much of a decision impact, because obviously budget is of primary concern here, but I would be reassured that we are looking for the future in terms of saving our energy costs and looking at ways that we can put things in now if work's being done that are going to be fit for the future. And part of being fit for the future is thinking about it with under the environmental lens and climate crisis lens. Thanks, Chair. Apologies for interrupting.
What I can say is that in the discussions with the contractors, it is very clear that the current technology in a number of areas is significantly enhanced on what we currently operate with. So therefore, energy efficient boilers, energy efficient air handling, energy efficient pumps, and so on. So by default, because particularly at Swallows, the plant is in excess of 30 years old, any new replacement, modern technology will be significantly enhanced in a sense of carbon reduction.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, Martin, I hate to say this, but you can have the last word. I'm not making a habit of it, though.
I was going to promise that this was the last word from me, Chair, so I appreciate it. I just didn't want Councillor Nundy to feel ignored. So I'll give you the usual sensible answer, and then I'll give you my usual tongue-in-cheek answer, which is obviously in terms of Sheerness Pool current condition, we've done that. We've done those surveys, and we feel that the spend that we're proposing is what's needed for the short term of that. My slightly tongue-in-cheek answer is it's 12 to 14 million pounds to build a new swimming pool at Sheerness, and that's what we would want councillors to be looking to earmark for the future, and that would solve the swimming pool provision in Sheerness.
Yeah, well, let's move on. So if there are any major changes, no doubt officers can notify members of the committee as we go forward. So members, I have proposed. Do I need a seconder? Yes, Hayden, thank you. Recommendation 1 and 2, all those in favour, please show. And make that 8. All those against and abstentions. 3 abstentions, so that's carried. Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Okay, members, our next item is Crisis and Resilience Fund, SJ, who very kindly printed out two sides which arrived very, very late. It was very good of her to rush around and print it out for this committee. Obviously, if she'd had more time, she would have made it bigger. But and I ain't being sarky. My eyes are really going. But we really do appreciate you. Thanks, Jay. We really do appreciate you giving it to us. Up-to-date information. Thank you, SJ. So, do you want to introduce your report?
Thank you, Chair. So the report outlines the new Crisis and Resilience Fund. This is the government's replacement for what was Household Support Fund. This came into play from April this year. The funding is allocated as per Household Support Fund, so it goes through county and we receive a local allocation, which is based on the formula, deprivation formula that they've used previously. We have received an allocation of 438,000 in this financial year, and that fund must be spent before the 31st of March 27. And then there are 2 consecutive following years, of which we will be allocated yearly. There is a slight change to the fund in that it now includes, well, not at this point, it will include discretionary housing payment as of year 3, which currently sits with the Revenues and Benefits team, and that will merge with CRF by the end of year 3. But no changes have been made to that in this current financial year. The primary objective for CRF is to provide a safety net for those on low incomes who encounter a financial shock. There is a slight shift in that previously Household Support Fund was very, very targeted at that emergency response. So it was very much kind of supporting people at that first stage. And we're really pleased to see that this has taken a more longer, wider view of supporting people by helping to support individuals' financial resilience, but also bolstering the local level service provision. So enabling us to work with local services and the voluntary sector to develop services that can help people in a more long-term approach, rather than kind of that very kind of initial one in, one out kind of process. There is a reactive crisis support provision, and the county will be delivering that. So we will not be delivering as we will still be working with food banks, and we will still be working with our core partners, but Kent County Council will be responsible for that first front door. So there will be a provision. It hasn't been launched yet. I'm told that it's imminent. So we'll be able to share more details with members at the next report. In order to deliver this scheme within the strategic framework of the Empowering You strategy, we've worked really, really closely with our voluntary sector partners. As in previous years of Household Support Fund, there are some services that we have continued to deliver because they are evidenced to be very critical really to our communities. Those include things such as the Fuel and Water Advisor, Citizens Advice, and various projects that are detailed in the report. However, we did launch a grant scheme which is detailed within the paper, and this has allowed us to provide local services with funding within what they call the resilience element of the fund. So that was significantly oversubscribed. We really did we had it in excess of over £250,000 over what we had budgeted for. So it really did. It really was a difficult decisions for the panel to make. However, the paper that I've tabled, the very small paper that I've tabled this evening, details the outlines of the primary projects that have been funded. There's some really exciting new work within those projects, and there's some existing projects as well. So if you want to go into any more detail about those projects, I'm happy to discuss those. Please get in contact with me, and we will be able to present you with the full details of everything that's going to be up and running in the near future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, SJ. Excellent report. Deja vu, because we were looking at the resilience, which is my bailiwick. And it's long overdue, nobody's fault, because we started this back in 2019 and then COVID hit, and we've almost been, not just us, a lot of organisations have been firefighting on the crisis after crisis after crisis ever since. So for us to now have the space to get onto that resilience, which I think is the only way forward, it really is a good thing. So I've got Hayden and then Tom.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, SJ, who was one step ahead of me and answered what I was going to ask. And I was just going to say that these projects look great, and I was going to ask for more information about them via email, particularly, obviously, some of them aren't there yet, and if I could get a note when they are and when they're available. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add that we do have a CRF webpage, and that's been developed, and all of the projects and how to access them and the application forms, etc., will all be in that web space as well. So when that's kind of finalised, we can share that with members.
Thank you, Chair. So I wish we lived in a world where this wasn't a necessity. That would be ideal, wouldn't it? But that's what happens when central government imposes austerity on people. But that's a different discussion topic. Thank you for this, SJ. This is really handy, because when I'm then talking to people and they say, what are the council actually doing about this? I can get this out in a magnifying glass and show them. But it's really handy. And some of the projects, are stuff that's already happening. There's some great Sheppey initiatives that are on here. Food for Independence, the Sheppey Support Bus, the Pyramid Project. And I know a lot about those, but there's other stuff that's come from other areas of the borough that maybe I didn't know a lot about, that may or may not be new, or that they could be ongoing. But it's nice to have that input and nice to have that understanding as to what is being done elsewhere. It's a shame that we live in such a deprived area, but it's good that when we're given the opportunity, the council responds to the actual needs of the area rather than vanity projects. This is all good work that is actually going to benefit people. So I applaud the report and I'm happy to note it.
Just a question about citizens' advice. So these are all projects that are being funded through this grant, is that right? So citizens' advice has historically had a separate grant from the council. That's not being rolled into this. That remains separate. Just for understanding that. Thank you. But yeah, it is a very good list of projects, and yeah, I'm sure it'll be very valuable.
Because it's under the Crisis and Resilience Fund, they had to apply for it alongside everybody else. So what they've been allocated is separate from their core grant delivery.
Thank you. Now, Dolly did ask if she could speak on this item if she made it, and so I'm calling her.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I do apologise for the haphazard way I've turned up at this meeting. Won't happen again. I just wanted to highlight SJ and the team's work. The question I've got over it is, how did the percentages fall in terms of area application, which you might want to take up after the meeting, in terms of we always see when grant applications come out a little deficit around the Sheppey area. You know that I've tried really hard to support officers this time in giving them the most opportunities to access lots of different projects on Sheppey, and I'm really pleased to see that some of those have made the list, so that's great news. But if it's possible, I'd definitely like to take you up onto a more lots of information about it if possible. But the question is, have we got a percentage fall of did we get an even spread across the borough for grant applications on this? Doesn't matter who was successful or not, because that will show that SWAL is doing its job in terms of making sure that it isn't just people who can write a good grant application. It's about, we're looking at those really much needed local projects. But again, don't let that move away from how good this work has been. Thank you, Chair.
If I may take that one away, Chair, and respond to Councillor Wooster with that information.
Yeah, and if you, I'm quite happy with that, but could you CC in the rest of the committee, because we're also interested in the answers, aren't we? Yeah, good. Lloyd and then Leanne.
Thank you, Chair. Again, like everyone, compliments on the report. Really good piece of work. Two comments, if I may. First is the dreaded LGR. You say about KCC being the sort of the first step or the first door, whatever it is. And this comes back to the conversation we had before this meeting. This is a prime area, I think, where if we can, to get our foot in the door and see if we can help shape what the future unitary authority will deliver in this particular area and make it work for us. But that leads me to one of the questions is actually how much, when this transfers down, this is, LGR is meant to save money, but my thinking is actually you're now going to end up having potentially to deliver the service which KCC are going to do, you're going to end up having 3, 4 or 5, depending on whatever the decision is. I don't think it's going to be 1. People doing that. So, and there's going to be a cost implication to the future council, or what that may be. So that's that point. The other one is connected to this, and again, great for saving the paper because this could have gone on to 4 sheets. So, in my time here, and it's been a fair while, I was drawn to the street lights. The project supports women working in the sex industry across Wales. I don't recall in my time ever actually having a sort of a report on what actually the length of the issues are. I'm not going to say problem because it's not a problem. What issues there are across Wales in this particular area, because I don't think we've ever talked about it. And is there something which we could actually do as a council to help with that? And maybe that's something for a future meeting for this committee or another committee to actually look at actually what is the extent and what can we do to, I'm not saying stop, ideally, but help those who are in that industry hopefully get out of that industry. Thank you.
I think it's is it what they call it, the oldest trade in the?
Yes.
Yeah. But there is a little nugget there, and this, back to what we were talking about earlier, and I'm hoping that Charlotte will be putting our pearls of wisdom on her little list and finding a way of doing them. But yes, that is, I think that, and I have seen others, and I did see when, because I was a cabinet member when COVID started, and the way that other authorities across Kent, can't speak for anywhere else, where other authorities across Kent were chucking money to get it out, had no data back or anything else, whereas, you know, the way that we responded at very short notice, the way our staff knocked themselves out, not only getting what was needed where it was needed, but also having the data afterwards to say what the issues were and where, here, what's it, who, where, why, what, and when. And I know for a fact that certainly on what they called it, round 1 and round 2, or whatever it was at the time, say other councils were just chucking it out the door. And well, we go to Lloyd Bowen, and he was dishing it out to the community groups, you know, and he might give us a line to say, well, I gave it, passported it to them, but you know, we're not really interested. We spent it. That's what we wanted. As I say, we had so much data, and we've collected so much data throughout all of this. So if there was any benefit to these crises, it is that we have got a better understanding of the demography. Not that we would want it, but prefer not to have had the crisis. But that information always stands you in good stead going forward. And so, in terms of the LGR and what other people are doing and how we could put our spin on stuff, I'm sure Charlotte will be keeping a list of things that this committee could realistically look at that would benefit us and anyone else going forward. If we can put it like that, as we discussed earlier. Did you want to say anything else, Jane?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to your comment about shaping delivery, we've tried really hard to ensure that we are continuing some of the good work around the One Swale stuff, the network and the roadshows, but we're developing that so that it gives us a very clear patch of work that we're doing. And Streetlight are fantastic. We can invite them to come and give a presentation and some insight into the work that they are doing in the borough, because they can give some really interesting data around that.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some amazing organisations on this list for all over Swale. What I wanted to ask you is how many we're not having to, or we haven't had to turn people away, or have we had somewhere else to turn them until KCC gets this new front door scheme sort of working? Because obviously you've done amazing to get this up and running since April and have sort of people already receiving funding and everything. But as you're no longer we're no longer the front door service for people for that first step, have we had somewhere to send them, and will we still have until this other schemes up and running?
Yes, but it has been difficult, I have to say. We have relied on the generosity of our local service provision. The voluntary sector, as always, have really come forward. The food banks and others who are part of this scheme now. So although we've had some individual cases that we've worked with, they aren't accessing that KCC service at the moment, but that they have reassured me that that should be imminent. So yeah, we're working however we can with the local services to ensure that people aren't not supported.
Okay then, members. The recommendation is that the committee is asked to note the contents of the report, and the committee thank the officers for the excellent work that they have done on this on behalf of our residents. Are we happy with that one? Because I think you have. Okay, all in favour? Right, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, members, and thank you very much, SJ. The next item is is that FOTA? Right, okay. Okay, the next item 9 is temporary accommodation scrutiny report. We all know about these. Charlotte, are you doing this?
Yeah, although I do have Zoe here who actually produces a lot of the figures for this report, but she's here for another item, so I will cover this. So I think members of this committee will be very familiar with this report. It is a summary of some key information around temporary accommodation in particular. The stats in here go up to the end of the last financial year, up to Q4. We are just processing the first quarter of this financial year as well, but obviously not in time for the publication of this report. We are seeing, after a period of time over the last couple of years of stabilising temporary accommodation, we pretty much got it around to the 280 households in statutory temporary accommodation. As of Q3 last financial year, we have seen that continue to increase. And I had a quick check of the figures earlier today, and we are actually up to about 350 households in temporary accommodation, 350 households in temporary accommodation. So we are seeing an upward trend, which obviously is concerning. We are seeing just an overall increasing demand for the service, and obviously more housing assessment plans, and again just that struggle to get appropriate move on as we can go through this strategy. The report details kind of where we are accommodating those individuals, and as per previous reports, we are heavily reliant on nightly let accommodation, and I don't need to reiterate obviously the unfairness of the 2011 90% LHA rates, but we'll mention it anyway. So that obviously causes an increased cost and burden to the council. There is I think it's also important, and we have included a temporary accommodation flow, because these aren't static numbers. They are a lot of people going in and out of temporary accommodation quite consistently, and that obviously demonstrates the level of work and resource and effort that goes into supporting individuals going forward. And again, the report also outlines those that have been in temporary accommodation over the 6-month period and sort of kind of breaks that down. So again, we do have people that have been in temporary accommodation over the 2 years plus. Clearly, time moves on, so new people enter that 2-year period, but also people do leave as well. I think the only other thing to really also mention is the housing register is the number of applications to the housing register and the level of reviews that the housing register team have to do are also increasing quite considerably. Unfortunately, the number of lets that we get and the number of levels of affordable homes coming forward is quite limited. So again, getting truly affordable homes through the register is again quite challenging. And looking at the affordable home delivery last year, that was our lowest affordable homes delivery in quite a while, really. We've always sort of been over the 200, nearly reaching 300 in 23-24. So having 197 units of affordable homes, new affordable homes delivered, again, is a shame. But we also understand the backdrop, because we know that registered providers aren't developing their own stock anymore. and we do get some sort of limitations through the planning system as well. So the financial position at the end of last financial year, we did end up with an overspend, mainly because of that increase in temporary accommodation towards the end of the financial year. And it ended up with about 367,000 overspend that was reported. So I think we'll turn to some more positive aspects, because that's all been a bit doom and gloom so far. We do have some affordable homes in the pipeline. We still have a number of those homes without a registered provider identified. And that is something that the team are regularly working on. But we also need our registered providers to invest in that stock as well. But it needs to be financially viable for them to purchase those units as well. So it is still a challenging area, and we are developing our first social homes as a council ourselves, with 51 affordable homes for Cockleshell Walk, which is due for completion in 2028, early 28, I might add. The other positive news story is that we've had an audit on our temporary accommodation process that also looked into our decisions and the whole process of making a homeless application and those types of things. And it came out with a sound assurance in place. There were a number of minor recommendations that came forward, and the one I wanted to highlight to the committee is that we were very keen when we brought the temporary accommodation policy to committee that we would review it annually. And we missed the review date of that, which was, it was last agreed in October 2024. So there should have been a review in October 2025. We have done a desktop review of that policy, and there aren't any substantive changes that as officers that we want to recommend. So we are looking to recommend that we extend the formal review period, but if anything substantive changes, that we bring it to committee earlier. A copy of the existing policy is shown in Appendix 1, and it's very much around how we allocate temporary accommodation, how we manage it. It's very consistent with a lot of other temporary accommodation policies in the rest of Kent as well, for some reason. And it is fit, from an officer perspective, it is absolutely fit for purpose within the current processes. I haven't gone into the scrutiny paper about the temporary accommodation purchase programme because we have a separate report this time. We have obviously included that in past reports. What I would say is we have done a piece of work as a team to look at how we can effectively manage temporary accommodation going forward, and we have a revised action plan which I have included a high-level summary of in Appendix 2. And we are again looking at every part of the service, for when people first approach us, to how we're carrying out our assessments, to how we can prevent, what our prevention opportunities look like, how we are managing our temporary accommodation, who we are working with. So it is very much an end-to-end process review, and looking at how we can improve work. It's very much led by the team in the areas that they feel that they can take forward, but also some strategic elements in terms of whether we do need to do any further rounds of a temporary accommodation purchase, how we are working with our Kent partners in terms of that wider procurement in terms of nightly lets, and also how we are collectively all working with our registered providers and other developers to encourage development of affordable and social homes in the borough. And I think the risks still remain the same, really, is homelessness services across the country are high, particularly in the southeast, and this is anticipated to continue. I think, again, we have discussed it a lot at this committee in previous meetings. We have high deprivation, we have low affordability in this area. There is a lack of supported housing in the borough, which could have supported individuals to move forward. Employment isn't always as stable for some of our households, which makes it more challenging to sustain tenancies as well. affordable housing remains an issue. We just don't have the scale or the delivery pipeline to meet our demand and our needs on the housing register and those in temporary accommodation. And the Renters' Rights Act is an interesting one. So we've not had a lot of new casework following the Renters' Rights Act. We have had an increase in Section 21 notices before the 1st of May, or the end of private rented sector tenancies. That was a large proportion anyway. So we have seen an uplift, but that is in line with the general demand uplift. I know we have seen landlords exit the market, and obviously the change in regulations will make people make the choices. So whether that's contracted the market as well and leaves less opportunity for people as move on options, I think we will see how things come out. We will also touch on in Zoe's paper later on about the revised homelessness strategy is the government's commitment around not leaving an institution homeless, such as hospital discharge, prisons. It's a really positive stance to take. The practicalities of that and the funding to support that aren't quite there yet. So we also need to look at how we make those things happen. Yeah, they're the challenges. There's quite a lot of them. They're multifaceted. I think everybody that we have in temporary accommodation has more need than it has previously. The costs of nightly let accommodation are high. Move on options are limited. I will leave it there. Questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got 3 people on the list. Recommendation is to scrutinise the report, to agree to amend the TA policy to have a formal review every 3 years. Should we amend it to say the next one, i.e. the next one would be 2027? Yeah. Just to dot an I and cross a T, if it was due last year. Yeah. What do we think? All happy with that? Good. Right, now I've got, and I'll take that when we do the vote. I've got Tom, Hayden and Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair.
And Anne and Kieran.
So just to be absolutely clear, the only thing that we're actually agreeing with the policy change is that the policy itself won't be reviewed. The quarterly performance monitoring and committee scrutiny will continue. Yeah, okay. You actually answered everything else, because the only thing I was going to ask was if there was like a significant legislative change somewhere along the line, would we then bring it forward rather than say, well, we've only got to do it every 3 years and 18 months later. The only other question I've got, it isn't really relevant to this, but perhaps an answer in writing. 18 months, is that how long it's going to take to build the 51 homes at Cockleshell Walk?
Yeah, the current programme is early. Don't like to give dates because get held accountable to them, but no. And construction projects are obviously a bit, do have slippage often. But the end of the financial year, 27-28 is the.
That does seem like quite a long time, especially perhaps that's just because we know how much we need the properties now. But okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Charlotte mostly answered what I was going to ask regarding the Renters' Rights Act and Section 21 notices. And this is more speculative. Do you think now that pressure will slow down, everything is in place? Or do you think that as tenancies end going forwards, more and more landlords will decide to exit the market rather than, finding a new tenant for those properties?
Yeah, I think it is really difficult because it's a lot of individual circumstances, and I think we've generally seen, and certainly it's been reported on nationally, that a lot of landlords have exited the Renters' Rights Act bills in its various guises took quite a long time to come through. There was also taxation changes for landlords, which again exited a number of landlords out of the market. So it's certainly challenging for some landlords to want to meet all the standards, and if you've got a mortgage on a property, it's not as beneficial as it used to be. And a lot of the renters' rights legislation probably does support those more institutional landlords and gives them obviously, the long-term benefit to tenants. So I, without a doubt, I think there are people that have chosen that might have the odd property. It might have been their pension. When the buy-to-let schemes came in a long time ago, there's a lot of things that are lining up where the market definitely has contracted. Also, there are still grounds where you can get possession of your property. It's just that you can't just use the no fault eviction end. So if people have got rent arrears, if they are, if there is antisocial behaviour there, if they want to have, live in the property themselves, they can get their property back. So it's just about getting used to the new regulations and the new rules. So I think it's had an impact. Hopefully over time it will have a long-term positive impact, but I've got no doubt that there has been landlords that have sold up. Hopefully other people will look to invest knowing that it is a more of a long-term proposition and understand the regulations and the rules that go within it. But there also might be that some landlords aren't fully aware of the legislation and know everything that's going on as well. So, case law and informing tenants of their rights, and there's a lot of communication that's going. Been quite some good national campaigns from MHCLG themselves and some of the prominent housing charities as well to sort of educate individuals on all of that going forward.
Right.
Sorry. Obviously, to add more speculation, there are some rumours that, perhaps a incoming prime minister could also decide to make more tax changes to the way that income is generated through property, which could also have an effect. And aside from that, the fact that buy-to-let mortgages ever existed is insane. Truly insane that you can get a mortgage to purely make speculative profit from, but that is not the remit of this committee.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it was a slight slip of tongue or came out automatically, but you got the wording exactly right, Charlotte, because you said the word tragedy in presenting this, and it's absolute, not the report, but the fact we have this situation anywhere is an absolute tragedy. You also said, I think you said 350 households in temporary accommodation. That's not 350 people. That household could be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, of which 3, 4, or 5, 1, 2, or 3 rather, could be children. That's a tragedy, absolutely. This is one area where actually LGR might help. Possibly. All councils obviously have the homelessness and temporary accommodation issues, get that. But by having a unitary authority may mean that we can actually expand slightly further or be able to work with other partners in terms of like a block contract that says actually there are properties in, not we're going to get partner with them because they don't like us, Maidstone, but we could actually start tapping into branches that we may have been until now sort of blocked off to us. However, and again, LGR, what I don't want to see, if we can help it, is the council move ourselves forward 2-3 years. The council has put this person into temporary accommodation, but it's within their council area. Which could be that somebody from, depending on which way it comes out, using option 3 at the example, you could have somebody on the Isle of Sheppey being housed in Dartford or Gravesham. That's not good. So if there was a way somehow within the future to almost say, okay, we will look to prioritise you in almost the area where you are, so it's then not as much of as a big enough upheaval to people's lives anyway, that we could try and accommodate that. And then that comes on to my third point about Cockleshell Walk. I agree, 18 months. I'm not surprised. But that's one of the standards of the bureaucracy around such things, and other countries around the world, whether you like them or not, can build cities in that entire time. But the way the system in this country runs, they do fall down very quickly. But yeah, they are needed now, but we can't deliver them now. It is going to be 18 months. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I just had a quick look at the thing. So not number of children, but households with children in them is 160 households currently, as of today's stats. Obviously, there could be multiple children within a household. I think, homelessness services across all of Kent are challenging. Obviously, some areas have lower numbers than we do. We don't have a housing revenue account. Whoever we merge with will have. So I think there is an opportunity around affordable housing going forward, and some of the challenges that we have because we don't have our own stock. Those things do open up. So I think there are some opportunities with LGR. Hopefully we'll find out later this week who that might be, and then we can start having those conversations. We do try to place within the borough as much as possible. Obviously, in certain cases, we might, with domestic abuse cases, for example, you might not place in the locality. Zoe will know this much better than I do, but there is suitability around temporary accommodation as well, so which is in legislation. So again, there are some safeguards there around those things.
Very quickly, because I forgot one very quick one on the option about the 3-year review. I totally agree with that, because that also means that we should be able to get a final review in before we cease to exist, and that review should hopefully put us into the best here you go position that we can achieve for whoever comes after us. So I totally think that's right, but it needs to be before the new council starts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank the officers for working so hard, but we all know there's a bottleneck. However hard in planning, we work to try and get affordable housing on the agenda. The registered providers are not keen. And then we used to have our own stock given away, and now we all see in our areas houses being sold so stock elsewhere can be brought up to standard, but that means one less property all the time. I find that so frustrating. My last point, Cockleshell Walk, so exciting, but there's a very strong rumour going around it's being sold to Lewisham, even from people who I would say are in the know.
Over my dead body, Anne.
Well, I want it said here, it's for Swale residents who are on the housing register. I don't normally tell people I'm a councillor, but when people get on their soapbox and tell me it's going to Lewisham, I do. I wave that card and say, we've been here for years. We've been waiting for the money to be available. I know that to be the case, but I'm sure we're all going around telling people it is social housing for Swale residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo what Councillor Kavanagh said. Thank you to Charlotte and the officers and her team for a comprehensive report and for all the good work that they do. Just wanted to expand on paragraph 2.11, and this may have been spoken about before, so apologies in advance. The audit picked up that the policy should be reviewed annually. Just wondered why they highlighted that, and just wanted to understand what a desktop review meant. Thank you.
So I think, as all auditors are, they're very fine on the detail, and we said that we would do it and we hadn't. So they were just very thorough as part of the audit and noticed that it should have been, it said annually, and that year had passed. So that was why they did. In terms of desktop review, I think it was, officers did a read through review to see if there was any changes that needed to come. We haven't gone out to consultation. We haven't done, some data or anything like that. It was kind of a principal read through just to make sure it was currently compliant, and whether we needed to make any, there was any obvious changes that needed to come forward. Or, I mean, we regularly review things like complaints and all of that, and just to see if anything needs to feed into our policies. But yeah, it was kind of, let's just make sure it is fit for purpose, and the view was on that. So therefore, we didn't feel like it needed a more substantial piece of work doing on it at this stage.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Final one is Peter. You get the last word, Peter.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes. There's obviously with LGR, I fear that where our properties are cheaper, that the other groups, I mean, somebody mentioned something about Maidstone, was no way Maidstone would be cheaper than Sheppey. So I think we're going to get an influx then from outside. I'm sorry to put doom and gloom. The other problem, which is something that you obviously can't deal with, was the previous government. Actually, if people had buy-to-let mortgages and they were individuals, which is why a lot of landlords have cleared off, that was the interest was then not a business tax deductible, which was outrageous, quite frankly, because it jolly well is. But if you're a company, then you can do it. So I do fear that we will get an influx from more wealthy areas of people that, we've seen that from London now. So some of the councils have been buying up properties in where they're cheaper and shipping people down who frankly are not working, and that's even more pressure on our system. So not a lot we can do about it, but that's the situation. Thank you.
I think in terms of LGR impact, we've been part of a piece of work where we've done a Kent-wide review of temporary accommodation and the nightly let provision to look at what we could do collectively together. They did do analysis of how many people were placed in other boroughs by other boroughs. And actually, from a Swell perspective, our net position, we were fairly, we obviously do place in Medway sometimes, in Canterbury, Dover, other locations, depending on where we are. Not huge numbers. And the people that place here, it kind of netted off. I think it was Maidstone actually that had the most out of area placements in their borough. And I think that is mainly driven by the nightly let providers and the stock that they've already bought across the county. So I think that's kind of already happening. And sort of like we mentioned that you need to have a suitability assessment. So even though we will be part of a bigger council, there's obviously going to be things that are more negative, but there might be some things that are more positive as well. Of those things, like we might have eventually a bigger housing allocations process that will be across the whole new council, which will give more opportunities as well for those movements onwards. So I think it will be interesting to see how it lands, but I think we would have seen some of that impact. And we also don't want to steal Zoe's thunder, but I'm pretty certain you included where we get our homeless applications from, and we don't really get a lot from London boroughs through our homelessness route. I mean, clearly people can buy properties on the open market, but we do regularly get inquiries about London boroughs buying our social homes and things like that, and we do look into those, and I can't remember when they've actually been true. I think normally we look at them and it is exactly that. It is a rumour. I know obviously those boroughs in Kent that are closer to London are impacted by that because of the proximity. We aren't really seeing that as much here. I'm not saying it won't happen, but our experience is that that isn't a regular thing that is happening at the moment.
Okay, then members, two recommendations. One's to scrutiny. Going to have a break. Two is to agree to amend the TA policy, and I've amended it to put comma, which will be 2027, just so we're quite clear on that. So all those in favour of those two recommendations, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to call a short break. 8:52, 9:02, no, 9:02, 9:01. I'm an hour behind, which is why it takes a while to work out. And worked out how to put. Is it 8:52? I say 8:48, 8:58. Then okay. The next item and no offence to anybody else who's written any other reports, but the next item we have been waiting for. Charlotte, are you introducing?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as Chair just said, this is a report that you requested quite a while ago to review the temporary accommodation purchase programme and do a formal evaluation to see how effective it had been. We did need to wait till we had a full set of figures and had got all the properties occupied to give it a true sense of whether there was that sort of value for money proposal that was going to come forward. But we do now have the evaluation report. So I'll talk through the headlines and obviously then hand over to yourselves to ask any questions. So as you'll be fully aware, this committee, or the predecessor of this committee, the Housing and Health Committee, agreed back in January 23 that we could purchase 50 properties and allocate it a capital budget of 11 million. The premise was as an investor save approach and to reduce our reliance on nightly let accommodation and bring those costs down. We achieved those 50 properties and brought back a further paper in July 25 to just enable us to spend the remaining of that budget. We have purchased a couple more properties. We still have budget remaining, as you will see in the report, but there have been reasons why we haven't taken that forward, which is what I will come on to. In addition to the capital funding that the council provided, we also received some local authority housing fund allocations from MHCLG, which enabled us to add some grant funding into those. The first tranche needed to be spent on homes for Ukraine households that had gone through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and those relationships had broken down, and we had 4 properties that were allocated for that purpose. Once those are no longer needed by Ukraine households, we can go into sort of our general TA stock going forward. I've included in paragraph 2.4 just a general breakdown of the properties. We did have 3 properties as part of a previous purchase quite a while ago. So we have a whole portfolio of 55 properties. The majority of those properties are in Sittingbourne, with 42 properties in Sittingbourne, 9 on the Isle of Sheppey and 1 in Faversham. And predominantly we have 2-bedroom properties that we've purchased, which have been 38 properties as 2 beds and 7 1-bed properties and 7 3-bed properties. The original model that was produced as part of the business case for the capital allocation looked at outsourcing the management of the temporary accommodation. When the team undertook research into, who the best providers were, doing some soft market testing, spoke to a number of councils, 1 in Kent and 1 in Sussex, who both said they had outsourced their temporary accommodation management and then had proceeded to bring it back in-house. We took their advice and learnt from their lesson, which meant that we manage our temporary accommodation homes within the housing options team. Obviously, we weren't set up to manage properties, and that has caused a bit of a delay in terms of mobilisation. We've had to get contractors in place, we've had to do all the health and safety requirements and all of those things, and just that day-to-day housing management that needs to be done. And as we're not a stockholding authority, we just don't have those systems and processes in place. So the team have done a really good job in terms of rising to that challenge, but it has taken us longer than what the original proposal was. That has led to longer void periods than anticipated. We have still got quite large contractor delays, and that is something that we absolutely need to address going forward. But we also need things like gas safety checks in between occupations in case someone has tried to fix the boiler themselves. We can't rely on that to be done safely. So we do need to make sure that the properties are safe before we allow a new tenant to go in there. One of the benefits of this model, though, is that we can utilise today's LHA rates rather than the 2011 LHA rates. It is still at the 90% level. So obviously that does give us quite a considerable additional income, and that is an incentive that the government have put in place. So even though, the cost could still be higher, the income that we can get as subsidy is improved. In order to sort of progress the programme, we did recruit a project surveyor who worked and procured the properties for us. We're very fortunate that it was a contractor that we got in, but he was local and understood the borough really well, and actually had some very good connections with the local estate agents as well. So that process worked extremely well. And also the Mid Kent Legal Services also recruited an additional property lawyer that was specialised in residential property, because obviously a lot of the commercial property tends to be the work of a council. And Maidstone had a similar programme, so there was the resource there to enable us to do that. And all properties had a RICS home survey level 2 done to ensure, obviously, that there were no significant problems on the property. Although saying that, there was a couple of properties that we did not go ahead with once we'd put initial offers in, based upon either the conveyancing process or the survey work. Paragraph 2.9 just gives the capital programme summary costs, so the property purchase prices, the professional fees that and costs that we've incurred, the grant that we've received from the Local Authority Housing Fund, and also some additional grant that we received from Ukraine funding, and obviously the capital programme money. So we do still have a balance of just over £1 million capital that we can still procure more properties. Because of the void issue, and we were having a bit of an issue in terms of getting the correct LHA housing subsidy allocated, we didn't want to push forward buying more properties until we'd resolved some of these problems, because we could buy more properties but not having people in them and all of that is just a burdened cost to us. But we are resolving those issues, and there is obviously capacity and the appropriate delegations in place for us to purchase probably 3 or 4 more properties within the current capital allocation. So in paragraph 211, we've looked at the annual running costs utilising the financial year 25-26. I know this obviously isn't necessarily in the public domain, but obviously a number of you were in the budget briefing prior to this. This table includes the full true costs of running the property. So the staffing costs of managing the properties, which are kind of more embedded into our general staffing costs, but also the capital financing that we need to take account of as part of the capital funding that we have invested in these properties. So that obviously demonstrates, the cost of running those properties. But when you look at it at a per unit cost of property, there is a demonstrable benefit that this programme would have had savings of about 257,000 compared to if we'd have done the same properties in a nightly let way. So the original modelling, we would have received a higher saving, but the properties that we purchased are higher than we initially anticipated. So that's kind of the difference. The main thing with this, though, is we still own a capital asset. So we still have that value. So even though we are taking into account the capital financing, we could sell the property and then we wouldn't have that cost there. So the financial analysis does stack up that it does make us a saving, not as large as anticipated, but it still is a saving. We also looked at what worked well and what didn't work well in terms of a more qualitative perspective. We certainly found that the use of the local surveyor with a strong market knowledge was very effective. We managed to get suitable properties. The dedicated legal support was really effective as well, particularly that smooth transaction process. The flexibility that we had in the programme later on enabled us to buy larger family homes, and I think that's kind of, we need a mixed portfolio going forward. The properties that we've got have been fit for purpose, and completions of works have been met to the required standards that we've managed to do. I think importantly, the feedback that we've had from households is that they are really happy with those properties, maybe a little bit too happy. I did a back to the floor with the team last summer, and a lot of the people saying, could we just stay here? So I'm really pleased that we've got high quality temporary accommodation, but we also do want people to want to move on to their permanent homes as well. The repairs and maintenance arrangements have worked effectively, and we have got good contractor communication, and the compliance requirements for gas, electrical, fire safety, etc. have been met as well, consistently been met by the team. We have obviously, there's a lot of lessons learnt as well. I think any future acquisition should be based on housing need rather than delivery against a fixed numerical target. I think it was good to have that fixed target to go. If we did any future programmes of work, I think we would now look at, maybe our more complex cohort and, people that we find it difficult to move on, and whether we could do some cost reductions on that element, and we would need to do some modelled costs to understand what that would look like and if that would actually make a financial saving. Flats have been tricky, particularly in privately managed blocks. That's had additional legal, financial and management arrangements complexities. So I think going forward we wouldn't recommend purchasing any properties through that. We definitely need a dedicated housing management function. I think the team have done a really good job of managing those properties on top of the other work that they have. But particularly if we expand the portfolio any further, we would need to look at how we take that forward. And the maintenance contractor capacity has been a bit of an issue. So they have done all the works to the standard that we need, but the void turnaround times have been significant. And we would need to look at how we could scale that up to have maybe a framework with multiple trades on it to be able to pull off and get those turnaround times, just to get people back in. So table 2.16, table 4 within the report does go through all of the sort of key themes from the lessons learned around the legal processes. We did have some staff turnover within the in-house legal team that did cause some delays and some confusion around delegations towards the end of the programme, and again getting those properties completed. So we would look to address that in any future programme. The transactions, timing and coordination, everyone wants to complete on a Friday. That means we've got property empty for the weekend as well. Obviously with our 34-hour week arrangements, we aren't necessarily around. The team absolutely did get involved when they needed to, but that's making finance payments, that's collecting keys, there's all of those things. As I'm sure most people know, when completing a property, it gets all quite frantic towards the end. The property inspection and quality assurance, although the properties are of a suitable standard, the capacity within the in-house team to maybe view those up front, we could have maybe got the void works done in a more speedy time if we'd had the capacity to be able to do that. So again, about learning those lessons and making sure that they were included. Compliance and expertise is one key thing that we needed to do. As I said earlier, we didn't plan to manage the properties ourselves. So all of those compliance checks, getting contractors in place, doing all of that type of stuff, the team have had to learn on the job, and therefore have had to that has been slower because we've wanted to do it properly. So again, just making sure all of those things are in place. I've already mentioned the maintenance contractor and about how we could have possibly multiple or larger contractors to support us. And again, resourcing ability to support all of the compliance around just getting the properties mobilised and supporting How We Go. I think the other thing around the modelling, we were quite limited in acquiring higher value properties or in areas. So we've only got one property in Faversham. I think we don't necessarily need a lot more properties in Faversham. Sittingbourne seems to be the area where most demand is, but just having a bit more flexibility to look at a broader range of geography and maybe buying a few properties that maybe we aren't going to save as much money but maybe meet need versus, you know, just the financial incentives. Table 2.17 looked at the initial objectives of the modelling and the business case that came forward to committee and a view of whether we've met that. So investor save approach, it does stack up. We are, you know, it is more cost effective than the nightly let provision. Reduced reliance on private provision, it also meets that objective. Improved local availability, obviously all the properties that we have purchased are in our local area. We have also tried to make sure that they are fairly near the main town centres and have connectivity to transport, so people, even if it's not their most immediate local town that they would live in, that they could easily access others, and, you know, employment, education, etc. So we've met that objective. Improved the quality of accommodation. I say the feedback that we have had and the quality of accommodation that we've seen, it does absolutely meet that. The greater control over management and revenue costs. I have put this as a partially met objective, mainly because obviously we carry the risk of void periods, and until we get that void period down, we are, you know, that could be a bit of a liability to us as well. When we're purchasing on a nightly let basis, you know, if we don't need a property, we're not paying for it. So we are still carrying a bit of a risk, and without, you know, with a greater financial gap, that risk would reduce. Retention of a capital asset, absolutely. We now have a stock of 52 properties that we didn't have before. And generally house prices do tend to go up, although I know there was a bit of a stabilisation and a little dip, I think, last year. And better outcomes for households. I think that the feedback that we've had from residents is that it has met those objectives. So I think the overall conclusion from the evaluation is that it has demonstrated that this direct acquisition model has provided good quality, cost-effective temporary accommodation. Any future expansion will need to be done on a needs-led acquisition process, and we need to strengthen our operational capacity, those governance arrangements around it, and the contractor and staffing resources. I would recommend that we would need to review the model to look at different household makeups and sort of the requirements, maybe the housing management requirements for more complex individuals and households that might also need to be factored in as well. So the recommendation is asking for members to note the evaluation report, and happy to answer any questions about the evaluation report, and also to request that we revisit any modelling and see if a future capital programme could be considered as part of that. Thank you, Chair.
I'll comment at the end. I've got down Alistair, Hayden, Tom.
Thank you. This is a wonderful report. You know, ticked all the boxes and saved 257k. I mean, you know, what's not to like on this? And you know, I think I'd be very much looking forward and seeing whether we could expand it. I was just wondering whether you could expand on exactly what you meant by needs-led approach. I mean, certainly given our previous agenda item, there doesn't seem to be any lack of need, unfortunately, for temporary accommodation. So that to me would imply that there's scope for this to be expanded further. But I just wondered if you could explain what you were meaning by that.
I think I probably maybe meant more bespoke approach. So we really targeted 1 and 2 bedroom properties. We also have arrangements with Southern Housing for a range of 2 and 1 bedroom properties that we sometimes have difficulty meeting the nomination requirements for. So I think we have the people, we just don't have the right people for the right property. And we have a number of households that we don't really have a firm plan of their destination to move out of temporary accommodation for a number of reasons. So I think any future model, we might need to consider those long stayers in temporary accommodation. So very much the first approach was we get a lot of 1 and 2 bed needs, so we can get them in, we can move them on. And that it was more about flow of temporary accommodation. I think maybe, like say, more bespoke temporary accommodation for those that maybe are more long stayers. And if there is an opportunity, particularly when we become a registered provider, we've briefly looked at a model, for example, that Liverpool do, where they do a temporary accommodation to permanent homes. With us not having our full registered provider status, we wouldn't be able to do that. So particularly people that are, you know, if you've got a large family, or if you've got certain, you know, other requirements for a property, that we could maybe just look at those individual needs a little bit more, and maybe look to different modelling going forward.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask around the location of the properties. Obviously, without revealing too much, one of the biggest issues with temporary accommodation is support systems and access to services. So I was wondering, for a lot of these properties, you know, how long is it to the nearest train station? What's the distance to the nearest shop? You know, what services and things can these families access?
I haven't necessarily got that information to hand, but all I will say is that all the properties, I'd say the majority of properties are within fairly easy reach of our town centres. I know certainly there was requests to look at properties further out in more rural areas. I think we were passed information about some properties in Laysdown, for example, and even though they might be suitable for individuals that come from those localities, we just need to make sure that they are near transport hubs mainly. So we can certainly get that information. They're basically in urban areas, you know, that you can probably walk to most of the town centres, or they're in sort of, you know, yeah, they're in sort of neighbourhoods just off the main towns. We haven't really got many in rural areas or anything like that, but we can certainly provide a summary by postcode. We've got all of that information.
Thank you. It's a really good report. It's good to see the positives that have come out of it, and it's good to see that the report does deal with some of the things that haven't worked out as well, and actually has something in there about combating that in the future, which is really helpful. But my understanding is that Swell would have used capital resources to buy the TA properties, and therefore does the council have to make an annual charge against that in the budget to pay that money off the capital reserves? Is that?
Yeah, so the capital financing stroke MRP is the figure that doesn't necessarily show up on my budget. So it doesn't look like it costs us very much money, but yeah, in the, I can't remember what paragraph it was. 2.11, there is a line of about 600,000, I think.
686.
Yeah, that is the cap. That is the cap.
And how long? How many years is that going to take to pay back? Because it won't be 686 in 1 year's budget, because that would be.
I would need to check with our 151 officer on that. I think I've got a feeling it was 20 years, but I could be getting that confused with a different project. So if I can confirm. Yeah,
and this might be an unfair question to ask, because I think item 9 shows that it can fluctuate slightly, but this has worked. But there's still a £367,000 overspend in 25-26 on TA. So what size portfolio would the council need to have like a real material impact on that? Because I think if that's going to be what the report says is that we've got 55 houses or whatever the figure is, and it's working really well. But if buying another 20 houses is going to completely clear it, and if there was a way of predicting, I don't know if there's a way of predicting it. So I suppose that's why I'm asking the question, really. But then that's something that I think would be a reasonable thing to look into completing another 20. If it's going to be another 200 houses, then maybe there's an argument it may not be worth it, you know.
I think that's kind of why the second recommendation exists, is to actually do some of that modelling. You know, we know that this isn't the only thing that we are looking at. I think this is one of our tools. We don't also want to have too much stock where we can't move people in, and you know, it can be quite challenging managing people in temporary accommodation. So I don't think we want to underestimate the, you know, the amount of work it does, and sometimes the risk of passing that on to someone else, and we pay a premium for that, for other people to you know, have those resources and have things at scale to be able to manage the processes. And we are obviously trying to reduce the numbers in temporary accommodation as well. So I think we can do some modelling to look at what would be a good level to not put too much burden on the council. Equally, if we find a property isn't suitable, we can sell it, can't we? So there we can de-risk fairly quickly, and being a property that you could just put on the open market tends to sell fairly quickly. The only thing I have with all of these things is when we're buying properties, when our nightly let providers are buying properties, we are actually affecting the local housing market for the people that actually want to move into those as well, isn't it? So I think it's about how we make sure that we are providing that. And that's why it always goes with, we'd always prefer affordable housing. And hence why I mentioned, you know, if there is something that we could do long term to have temporary to permanent and have them as social homes or affordable homes, you know, is there another model as well that we could look at? But I think we need to do some more work to say, look at the optimum and the spread of properties in location, sizes, and all of those types of things as well. Because some of our households in temporary accommodation have some quite unique needs as well. So we need to consider, and it has to be suitable for their needs and the size and all of those types of things as well. Thank you.
I know it's 9:30 and no one really wants anyone to mention LGR, but if the payback period for this is going to be 20 years, what sort of protection is there going to be that after LGR, the new authority can't just say, we don't think we need that, we're going to sell it all? Because that would feel like we'd done some good work now, but then in 4 years' time, that's just all gone down the Swanee.
All I would say on that is, I think the councils in Kent that have a similar problem to us are doing the same thing. And in fact, actually, I think a lot of people are doing the same thing, because there is that incentive around the LHA rates. The government are encouraging us to do that as well through the local authority housing funds and things like that. So if we were the only ones doing it, I would share your concern. I think the fact is, whoever we're likely to merge with, other councils within that merged large council will also have a similar programme.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To be honest, the comments that I was going to make have already been made, so I will still speak because I like the sound of my own voice. What I would say is, I know we've been getting excited about this initiative for quite a while, so it's great to see this report in front of us tonight, Charlotte. And I think our thanks go out to the team who have had to deal with something they weren't probably expecting to have to deal with. But this initiative is going to make an enormous difference to the people that are on our TA list. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd have the accommodation across the borough, but we're not in an ideal world. Clearly, what you've got is working. I take on board what Tom's saying. That is a bit of the dreaded 3 letters or what they're going to do. They're going to see our assets and go, ha ha, yes, we'll cash those in. But as Charlotte has said, we've got other authorities out there that are doing exactly the same thing, and it's working. We'd love to have affordable housing, we all know that, but it's just not happening. And if this is a way of helping the situation, then kudos to us. So I think thanks to this committee should definitely go to the team for getting this up running and continuing to run and run. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a magnificent achievement. I think as a council, we ought to be really proud of this. I mean, I know the report has concentrated a lot on it making financial sense, but as someone who's lived in social housing, I really value the fact that these families are having a home. It might only be a temporary home, but it's far better than a nightly let. I do have a question, though. On 2.4, it said about the 3 existing properties. I'm just being nosy now. How many bedrooms are they and where are they, so I can add them to my list?
So there's one on the island, one in Sittingbourne and one in Tenham. I'm going to say they're 2 3-beds and 1 2-bed.
3. 2 3
Yeah.
and 1.
2 3-beds and 1 2-bed,
Thank you.
I think.
And just so you know, I remember these things. Apropos the budget briefing we had, the Tenham one, not to put too fine a point on it, came about through the empty home scheme. Just I'd mention that. Leanne.
Thank you. Just wondering, reading through the report, I think it's brilliant, and what has been done is amazing. But are some of the properties, are they made accessible for any? I mean, how do we know how many sort of temporary accommodations require sort of access for disabilities or anything like that?
Yeah, so the properties that we bought are very much general needs properties. I think we have got one that is adaptable, isn't it? Or was certainly a ground floor sort of masonette flat that definitely could be adapted if necessary. I think that's where, when we get those very individual needs, is where the nightly let properties actually have, you know, we have more choice, or we could work with a different provider to find. Again, sometimes that might be where we use things like the Travel Lodge or Premier Inn or something like that for short term, because they will have adaptable rooms to make sure that we can house people appropriately until we can find something suitable. So it is very much on a case by case basis there, but say the properties that we bought are sort of general street properties at the moment. Doesn't mean to say that we couldn't adapt if we found that we had somebody that we couldn't place, and look to those types of things. And I think that goes back to those bespoke challenges that we have with certain households to meet their needs. How do we purchase something, but then it might only ever be for their needs, and therefore, you know, we don't want to buy a property, put someone in it for a couple of years and then sell it because it doesn't meet anyone else's needs, or you're under occupying, or you've got great adaptations that people don't need. So I think it's about trying to balance those things out as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions. First one was, I think in your first or second sentence, people don't want to move out.
Thank you. It's just a question, really. I'm very keen on safety. You know, I've got some properties, and particularly the gas safety. If there's a change of tenant, by law, you have to have an in-date certificate for that as soon as it's empty, you've got to have another one, which is fine. Don't have a problem with that, because I've had the same problem that you've had, where people have fiddled with boilers, and the same with the electricity. Electric, I don't, normally it's up to 5 years for electricity. So I'm not sure about temporary accommodation, but I've had people alter electric circuits, unbeknown to me. And I'm very keen on seeing that obviously future people don't, or the same people don't get injured.
Okay, so I'm in need of temporary accommodation, and you give me one of these places. A couple of questions here. First of all, do I sign a contract? Because
Yeah, it's a license agreement.
okay, I'm just thinking that I like it so much I'm not going to move. Well, sorry, love, but
No, the Housing Act means any temporary accommodation is outside the security of tenure, so we are fine on those.
good. The second point, most of you have raised all my points, but it is an excellent report, and we have waited a long time for this. But also along the lines of what we were talking about earlier with, our staff, and I hope Leanne's new, but the rest of us have been on this committee more or less since the start. Our staff work their socks off. I, as you know, have been on this council for many, many years. I know for a fact there were no staff in the housing department who were sitting twiddling their thumbs before we bought these properties thinking, God, I wish I had something to do. So they've not only been doing their day job, they've also been doing a housing management job, because we decided actually it'd be better off doing it in-house. Now, I know we've had different restructures to try and get the best fit and all the rest of it, but our staff do an absolutely sterling job on behalf of my residents and your residents and all the residents of the borough. And they could say, well, no, it's not my job. I can't fit that in. But they just all muck in, and it's how best can we, because they are devoted to the housing needs of our borough, including the two people sitting next to me. I can't say enough how proud I am of the work that our staff have put in on this. And you're right, Alistair, 257 grand is 257 grand. And, if it weren't for the other interventions, and we've had a stream of reports through about what the different parts of that department are doing to try and ensure that people stay in their homes, that landlords don't suddenly decide to do X, Y, and Z, as well as purchasing the properties. If it weren't for that, it wouldn't be, we're budget's over by 300 odd thousand. Compare it to where we were, over 400 people in TA. 420 households in TA before we got any of these. I mean, we were what, 1, 2, 3 mil over budget? And when we're saying, well, we've got a budget gap, can you look at the non-stat, your other committees? Well, basically, we could have had the money that every committee is spending to pay for temporary accommodation. If our staff had not, led by Charlotte, sort of looked at it and said, well, how can we do it differently? How can we make a difference? Let's do this, let's try that, let's try the other. I'm so proud of the work that they've done. And I know other people are following, and other people are burying their heads in the sand. But it is a fantastic report, Charlotte, and I'm really pleased that, I know we moan, it's taken such a long time. And the payback will be better, because there were the voids, and there was, getting used to doing X, Y, and Z. And of course, there was the issue, and I don't know, perhaps it's a bit late in the report to be saying, do you all understand about LHA rates in 2011 and today? Because we put you in TA, we can claim housing benefit on your behalf. at the rates that they set back in 2011, which means that, which is why all this is always costing us money, because there's a constant subsidy by this council. Whereas if we own the properties, as we know from this committee, if we own them, we can collect them at today's rates. There's, there's this Department of Health, Department DWP, whoever it is. And we learnt about that and we've been implementing it. But going forward, we could get more on that as opposed to where we started. So, yeah, I can only see going forward that unless there's even more crises, that things are, on the up, or at least staying level. And I would most certainly agree to spending that 1 mil on more properties. But as it says in the report, you take on more properties, we're going to have to start having a proper housing management team to do it and to manage it. So, but I know that they'll look at it, but most certainly look at the modelling. But yeah, I can't say praise enough the work that our staff have done on this, and I hope you'll all support that. So, we've got 2 recommendations. Note the evaluation report and request the modelling is reviewed based upon the evaluation findings and on a housing needs-based portfolio, and for a further programme to be considered as part of the capital programme. Now, Charlotte did say that she has got delegation, unless I wasn't listening correctly. So she can fetch a report, not tomorrow because it's audit. But she could fetch a report forward next week and say, yeah, I've looked at it and I thought I'd buy another couple of properties, because she can go ahead and do it. So, yeah, all power to your elbow. Right, those are the 2 recommendations. So all those in favour, please show. That is unanimous, thank you. And thank you very much, Charlotte. You don't come often, Zoe, but if we weren't happy, we'd be saying it.
I always watch. You just can't see me.
I see. Right. Next one is item 11, the rough sleeping, and this is all part of it as well, the rough sleeping support services. So you'll be doing this, Zoe?
No.
Oh, Charlotte, no? Carry on.
Yeah, apologies from Roxanne Shepherd. She's actually on annual leave this week. But she sort of looks after our rough sleeper services. So I'll just sort of a reminder back to the 14th of May extraordinary committee. We brought a paper forward to sort of discuss the night shelter options that this committee had asked us to look at. In that report, we highlighted that it was actually quite a complex issue and needed to be looked at with a raft of our other services that we do commission as part of our rough sleeper services, and how that would fit in, and whether the investment was the right thing to do. It was agreed at that committee that we would have a member working group, and that member working group met. Sorry, the committee wasn't in May. The committee was in April, and the working group was in May. And that committee, the working group, met to discuss how we allocated currently our rough sleeping grant, which has typically been about 705,000 per year as an allocation, because we used to have to bid for it, then it just turned into an allocation, and now it's been rolled into our wider grant. So we've taken the assumption that we'd allocate a similar level of grant. We may need to look at that differently in future years. As members are aware, the grant does reduce year on year as we go forward. So it reduces by a further 70,000 next year, and then the following year it's a 31,000, but that is being picked up as part of the wider budget setting process. The working group attendance was Councillor Neal, Councillor Perkin, Councillor Pollard and Councillor Watson, and was supported by officers to go through a series of options. As part of that process, we also used a prioritisation mechanism, a method called Moscow, which kind of allocated every service we reviewed into the must, should, could, and won't look at service. Officers presented to the member working group the current services that were taking place and sort of the outcomes that we currently receiving from those. So the working group met for, it was a good 3 hours, if I remember correctly. So there was quite a lot of depth that went into, and questions that probably couldn't be asked in an open forum, because we are talking about some quite vulnerable individuals and the complexities of some of the schemes that we were talking about. So I think personally, I thought it was very strong and robust conversation that took place. I think one of the key things that we can do this year, but we can't do in future years, is spend any of our grant allocation on temporary accommodation, even for non-statutory provision, which the Rough Sleeper Service does fall within. We do, when I get onto it, we are proposing a small allocation, because that's continuing like existing placements and things, which is allowed provision. Included in the report is obviously some information on our current numbers of verified rough sleepers on the street. I think it's quite important to note that we support a lot of people off the street as well into accommodation, whether it's through the Keys or whether it's through our nightly let provision. We do take a lot of people off the street and support those as fairly quickly, and that has been our model in the past. I think with the current processes, we do need to go towards more of an outreach approach and looking at how we can move people through as quickly as possible going forward. As part of the workshop, we also considered a range of different night shelter options that the team had done some quite extensive research on, and they are listed in section 2.7. They included a rotating church model. This was already discounted because we didn't have the level of engagement from a range of churches that we would need to be able to make that work. St Michael's Church, literally just over the road, and also our civic church, wanted to work with us, and we had some really, really good engagement from the church and some proposals that did come forward for a capacity of 8 to 10 male only accommodation. The police did raise concerns about the vicinity because there's been a lot of street drinking issues there in the past, not necessarily from the people that would access the shelter, but obviously the congregation that took place. So that it was an option on the table. We also looked at a HMO model that other councils have used. That is probably very similar to how we had our temporary accommodation, was a block of HMO anyway. So it was kind of very similar to provision that we've already got taking place. There was a village hall model, but again, there was no suitable venue was identified, and there can be conflict with existing uses because of the setup time, the overlap of different communities and groups. You know, I think this isn't necessarily an example, but you could have a scout group ending and then you've got rough sleepers turning up to try and do it. And sometimes those activities don't necessarily go hand in hand together. And also you need to set up the shelter beforehand, so you could limit some of those activities. We have also considered that the Keys site that we do fund has another building on site, and whether that could be used for more provision. We would need to look into that more detail. There's certain things like insurance and suitability of the building and various other things. And one of the members did raise about Z pods being looked at as part of a modular build that some other councils have done. And we did look at this previously. It was out of scope for this current piece of work, but we did work with the Z pods themselves and did some feasibility on some meanwhile spaces with some car parks in Sittingbourne. And at that time, those locations didn't suit, but that is something that we could explore in the future if it was felt appropriate. I think where we got to was a very challenging position for the working group. We kind of went through, like I said, a prioritisation process. We do need an outreach team and some core staff as a basis. We need to engage with rough sleepers at the point of contact. We need to have somebody physically speak to them, do their needs assessments, work out what they need, to even be able to offer them any support. So that was kind of a core provision and an allocation put in there. We do have a small 8-bed scheme that we work in collaboration with Southern Housing on. We have our own staff there supporting. And we've, again, members agreed to continue that provision. That actually could be very similar to a night shelter, but it is more long-term provision, so you wouldn't get the in and outs of an everyday thing. But in terms of the outcomes that you can achieve by working with people over an extended period, they are better health and long-term outcomes that you do achieve from that. One of the biggest considerations for the working group was about how we approached our funding position with the Keys. So the Keys is an 84-bed hostel. It's made up of, there are some flats and there are a number of sort of rooms as well. It is a very large scheme, and most supported housing these days probably aren't in as large schemes as the Keys. I think when we were reviewing what the outcomes that we were achieving from the Keys, I think if we'll be honest, even if we close the Keys tomorrow, our temporary accommodation, the cost on temporary accommodation alone, even if we just had to house half of them, would cost us more than the grant that we pay to run the Keys. So from a financial position, it's kind of not an option for us at the moment to not fund it without some alternative provision in place. But we also wanted to look at, could we enhance the outcomes there? So Riverside, who operate the Keys, came up with some proposals to maybe look at how we could use some of that provision differently. So looking at how we could use the flats. Can we have areas that are drug and alcohol dependency free? So if you want a recovery area, so if you are abstaining from drugs and alcohol, you haven't got your neighbour that has addiction problems still, so you can provide different support. So both of those options were considered by the member working group, and agreement was to progress with the Keys Plus model. So that is an enhanced grant towards the Keys, but with the very strong, what's the right words really? Just a very robust monitoring that we need to put in place to make sure that we do get these, and we're not just going to fund additional services without achieving those additional outcomes. And the mobilisation plan and how we audit those things going forward. So we are looking at that to go forward. Small budget for temporary accommodation and HMOs, and we have looked at how we're running the Housing First model, and we have transitioned that into our core rough sleeping team. There is a small budget for rent in advance, because obviously a lot of households that we need to move on from our provision don't necessarily have the money to do that month's deposit and things like that, just to see how we can overcome some of those financial barriers. But ultimately, the member working group did decide not to fund new provisions such as a night shelter within like a church hall, village hall type requirements, but we would use the temporary accommodation and the supported housing that we already commission and look at enhancing that. I had to change my paragraph 2.10 just as I was sending it to publication, because we were looking at also putting a day shelter in as well, and looking at how we can support rough sleepers to access those support services and voluntary and community sector support. We were waiting the outcome of the bid. That outcome has been achieved now or announced, and unfortunately we weren't successful. Citizens Advice Service had led on that bid in conjunction with Forward Trust and Riverside. My understanding is the fund was massively oversubscribed. We haven't had any individual feedback. We will be asking for that. But there definitely is a weakness of homeless support charities within the voluntary and community sector in Swale. And that is definitely something that we do need to explore further to enhance our support for this group. So members are asked to note the outcomes of the member working group and also to invite Riverside to a future meeting to scrutinise the implementation and impact of the Keys Plus model. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Good report. We've got one more to go. So I'm going to propose that we suspend standing orders until we complete the business. Are we all happy with that?
Agreed.
Good. Okay, so I've first of all got Karen, and if I squint, I might be able to see Carrie, who is also on the working group. I'm going to ask you if you want to speak, Carrie, but it's up to you. So Karen is first, and then Carrie, if she wants to speak, and Anne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So it was an absolute privilege being on that working group because we got to learn quite a bit about something that we don't really know enough about. Yeah, we did have to make some tough decisions. It was a real shame that a night shelter would have been absolutely fantastic. At St Michael's would have been perfect, but the police said no, and we sort of understood where they were coming from. But this was a church that was willing to support the night shelter. The village hall option was something that we could also see that would perhaps not work when you have got groups going into the church halls, village halls. That would probably not be too engaging with a night shelter going in there. We did think long and hard about what we had to decide, what was in front of us, and the Keys option did look at being the right thing to do. But as Charlotte has said, and I can't really go, what the report you gave, Charlotte, was absolutely perfect. Thank you. Was we did say that we did believe that Riverside should come in and have a word with us because we think they should be up in the hot chair so that they can answer a few queries that we had around scrutiny and things that we didn't feel they were doing to the best of their ability, I think is the best way of putting it. So yeah, although it is disappointing that we are not going to go forward with a night shelter, because I think that would have been an absolutely fantastic idea. The fact that we are going to go with the Keys is something that the service that they do there is just phenomenal, really. But yeah, it was an interesting 3 hours we spent locked in a room, not being let out until we made a decision. And biscuits were aplenty. But we did get a lot of common sense talking happened. I think that's the best way of putting it. So I will watch what happens with great interest. But no, thank you, Charlotte, for getting us to do that, because I think it needed to be done. It astounds me the sort of decisions you have to make that we don't know about. The sorts of, well, we could do that, but we can't do that. We'd really like to do that, but we have to do that. It's the sort of decisions we don't really have, although we do a lot of scrutiny in this committee. It is stuff that we don't normally see that's going on in the background. So we appreciate that. So thank you.
Carrie, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I echo your words that Charlotte and the team are amazing. Everything I think has been covered really well, and Karen covered anything I would say. Sorry, I don't know if I'm a bit quiet. I'm not very well. But yeah, difficult decision to make. But I definitely think we made the right one.
Right, thank you. And then I've got Anne.
Thank you. It's probably included here, but it doesn't seem to be explicit. When it's very cold and we normally invoke SWEP, will that still happen? Because I thought the idea initially was to do away with that because we'd have the shelter. So where would the budget be for that and how will it work? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, SWEP will absolutely still take place. I'm just scanning my report because I don't think I included it. It certainly was included in possibly the previous report or to the working group, but the cost to SWEP wasn't huge, but that was because we were accommodating a lot of rough sleepers into alternative provisions such as the key. So I think it is something that we need to monitor and we do monitor our SWEP costs separately. But the cost for a night shelter was over £100,000 at least, and it needed a lot of volunteers to make it viable, and the training and investment that also needs to go into those volunteers. So from a cost perspective, operating SWEP on the ad hoc nights, and I think that's the difference, isn't it? A night shelter would be every night over the winter period where SWEP is activated at certain temperatures. But I think the feeling from the working group was very much around if we can get things like the keys working well, we can get the throughput working well. So, and where we've got some more intensive support in some of the other schemes, that will give people that move on opportunity, and then hopefully the people that are in and out of SWEP, it could be a short term thing, and then we can get them into longer term provision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was just looking. Do we work with other charities as well, like say Porchlight, through with the homeless sort of?
We do, I think, and I know I say Roxanne's not here today, but she's been actively working with Porchlight and potentially on working on another scheme. I think it's just what opportunities come up, and it's sometimes it's a bit like some of the services that SJ was talking about under the Crisis and Resilience Fund. It's all of those services like the food banks, the debt advice, addiction services, all of those types of things we need people to access. And I think a lot, I definitely don't want to stereotype, but sometimes people, particularly when they are rough sleeping, can have quite chaotic lifestyles. So they don't want to turn up for an appointment at 11 o'clock to access that support. They kind of maybe want that support when they're ready to accept that support. So it's having that flexibility and how we can build those, which is kind of what that day support provision was going to be. It was going to be kind of like you can come for a hot meal, and while you're there, the other services are there to support you if you need it. And it's that type of thing that I think we need to look at how we expand in locally. And again, where we got the wider geography here, we don't have that one central town to always be able to support. But we do work, Salvation Army, we do a lot of work with, obviously all the food banks do support and things like that. But yeah, Porchlight, other charities like that, we don't have a strong delivery focus in Swell. They absolutely do support where they can, but it's having that wider funding to come and do some quite large services.
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering because I know about the charity because the Scouts, especially on the island, all the kids sleep in cardboard boxes, so they experience what it's like to sleep out overnight. And these are the sort of 6-year-olds, and it's tough for them. So they really get to open their eyes to what it's like. So if we're raising money locally through other organisations, I just wonder whether we can get their involvement in sort of policies and bits.
Okay, no one else has put their hands up, so we've got 2 recommendations. Note the outcomes of the member working group and to invite Riverside to a future meeting to scrutinise the implementation and impact of the Keys plus model. All those in favour, please show. All right, that's unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you, Charlotte. Right, last but not least, certainly not least, Zoe.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is to take forward a draft homeless and rough sleeping strategy to consultation. There's been a change in central government producing a national plan to end homelessness, the Renters' Rights Act, and we have to now produce an action plan, which will be better if we refresh our current strategy, although it is within its life cycle. We propose to update the priorities to early intervention to prevent homelessness, good quality affordable temporary accommodation, access to appropriate accommodation for moving on, and work to end rough sleeping. All we're asking at this time is that for your approval for it to go to consultation, for then a fuller policy to come back to committee once it's gone out.
Okay, come on, tune in. Tune in. Recommendation is to approve the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy for consultation. Is there anything in here that we want changed before it goes out? Hayden?
Nothing I want changed. I just wanted to comment how much this relates to the housing market assessment that we recently had through PTPWG delivered by Stuart. And the overlap there, and as to which I said there, it shows the clear issue in this borough is the fact we're not delivering affordable housing. That is a market failure as well as a council failure. And a lot of that housing that we are providing, it's not one bedroom, it's not flats, which we have a severe need for in this borough. And hopefully with this strategy, we can work towards bridging that gap. And I'm happy for this draft strategy to go out to consultation.
Anyone else? I can't choose waited all night for this, so I'm on a few points. Go on.
So one of the other reasons for bringing it forward is the action plan that Zoe mentioned, but we also need to put some targets in about the local government's outcomes framework. So at the moment we haven't necessarily put any targets, so we will definitely have an interesting debate when we bring back the final version. So I think it will be challenging to set some of these targets, particularly when we are getting our grant cut from central government to enable us to deliver some of this. So, and I'm very much, let's create a realistic target rather than, we want to maybe be ambitious and push ourselves, but we also need to consider the environment that we're operating in and the demands that we've got. When we met with MHCLG, their expectations is obviously quite a lot of improvement targets, eradicating rough sleeping off the streets. And as we've just discussed in the previous report, you know, if we are going to go to more of an outreach model and we've got increased demand coming forward, that doesn't seem like something that may be able to happen as well. So I think I just wanted to highlight that we are doing this off the back of the national strategy and the requirements. We do have to publish an action plan by the autumn.
I get the final date on Thursday.
Yeah, so we should get the final date very soon. So that's going to be quite, which is why we brought this report forward at speed, and Zoe's done a great job in terms of turning it around so we can go out to consultation, because we didn't want to just create an action plan and some targets with an outdated strategy. So it's kind of like, we might as well do that now, and obviously that does take us forward into LGR as well. I think that was all I wanted to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Charlotte. I can't remember because I've seen it and also we had it in the budget briefing. Was there something in this strategy about the cutting funding. I don't mean sort of baldly. Well, you've cut our funding, so we've cut our targets.
Yes,
a bit more discreet.
It does reference the fact that the funding is reducing and that we will have an impact.
As I said earlier, repeatedly, the staff are really good, but they're not magicians. And with everything else that we keep getting chucked at us, you cut our money, we can't, you cut the money for rough sleeping, we can't double our output, can we? Really? It ain't rocket science. And we do how you keep cutting our funding, we dig our heels in, we push back. You know, as we heard earlier, Charlotte is still in discussions with them, but no, we'll have something realistic based on what we've got the money for and what we think will do it. Because there's no point putting unrealistic high targets only to have them kick you in the teeth and say, you didn't get there, did you? Well, we knew we didn't. So, you know, be ambitious, but not unrealistic, I think. So, no, Lloyd.
Thank you. I don't know whether it's appropriate for this or not, but I'm going to just put it out there. You mentioned the last paper as well. With the changes that we are regularly now seeing in terms of the weather patterns in this country, ranging from when we have sweep for when it's cold, but other countries are also working on when it's really hot. And we are now third or fourth heat wave this year. Should we start thinking about actually, I get it's rough sleep, night time's nowhere near as hot as daytime, I get that. But if you're homeless or rough sleeping, actually being even out on the streets in the daytime is a huge concern for people's health. And should we start thinking about incorporating something to help with that?
Thank you. So the SWEP does apply for all weather, so it's not just cold. I think because that's when we activate it most, it is associated with it being minus temperatures, but heat waves, you know, obviously when we get to the temperatures that we have been, and our response can be different because actually it's not about the overnight provision. It is about where can you go during the day. It is about hats, sun cream, water, those types of sort of medical wellness support. Certainly when through the Kent and Medway Resilience Forum processes, when we did have the extreme heat wave, SWEP was activated across Kent and additional support was put in place along those lines. But it's more about provision and making sure that publicly accessible buildings are opened up for people to go into and things like that. Because sleeping overnight isn't necessarily as bad in that situation. Like I say, it is the daytime and it's having that shelter and go forward. Thank you.
Okay, no one else? Right, we'll get a good chew on it when it comes back. Recommendation then is to approve the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy for consultation. All those in favour, please show. That again is unanimous. Thank you, members, and thank you, Zoe. And we'll see you next time. I make that the last item. So thank you all for attending, and thank officers and last